The universe had always looked at humanity with mild curiosity, but rarely with fear or respect. Other species often spoke about humans as if they were fragile creatures, a minor footnote in a galaxy filled with powerful civilizations. They had heard the humans say it so many times, almost as if it were a prayer. Please don't make us furious. Most assumed it was simply a quirky habit of a timid species, a way of asking for mercy in a world they could not possibly understand. For humans, the words carried more weight than anyone could imagine. They were not just words. They were a warning, a reflection of centuries of survival, struggle, and the understanding of how dangerous humanity could become if pushed too far. On Earth, generations had learned to contain themselves, to think before acting, to manage their anger, and to turn every challenge into a lesson rather than a fight. The humans who traveled beyond their planet had taken that same mindset with them. They had learned that patience, caution, and diplomacy were often more powerful than brute strength. At the Galactic Council, the humans were treated as small players, newcomers who had no real power in the cosmic order. The council chambers were enormous, filled with beings of all shapes, colors, and energies, many of whom had existed for millennia. Some had tentacles, some had wings, others existed as floating light forms that seemed to hum with power. And in the middle of all this, humans stood simple, fragile-looking, speaking carefully, their hands folded politely, their voices steady. They bowed slightly and repeated the same phrase that had become almost a joke among the older races. Please don't make us furious. Most species laughed quietly behind their cloaks or shells, whispering to each other the humans were harmless. The humans did not appear aggressive or violent, and their technology, while advanced, did not boast the kind of destructive power that older civilizations wielded casually. From the outside, it looked like humans were weak, careful, and overly polite. That was exactly what the Council wanted them to think, but humans had learned something the Council had not. They had learned that patience was a weapon, that restraint could be as dangerous as fire, that a species that seemed polite and small could survive almost anything if it understood the rules of patience, strategy, and unity. They had survived extinction-level events, wars, and countless internal struggles on their home planet. They had built their societies on cooperation, understanding, and adaptability. And most importantly, they had learned that their anger, if ever unleashed, could change the course of events in ways no one could predict. The Council, of course, did not understand this. They thought the humans' warnings were just that, warnings without teeth. Every time the humans said, "Please don't make us furious," it was dismissed as theatrical caution, a polite way of asking others not to test their patience. They did not know that humanity had spent generations preparing for moments exactly like this, moments where the universe would underestimate them and pay the price. Meanwhile, humans quietly prepared in ways that were invisible to the galaxy. Their fleets were small, but strategically positioned. Their diplomats were trained not only in negotiation, but in observing threats and weaknesses in other species. Every human who traveled beyond their home planet carried knowledge of their species' strengths and limitations. Their calm demeanor, their politeness, their constant emphasis on patience, it was all a mask. It was a shield designed to protect not only themselves, but everyone around them, from the fury that could rise if humanity ever felt cornered. On the council floor, human delegates moved slowly and deliberately. They listened to the endless debates, to the bickering of species that had ruled parts of the galaxy for centuries. Some of these beings could destroy worlds with a single thought, yet they argued over minor disagreements, showing arrogance in their power. Humans, in contrast, spoke only when necessary. They measured every word. And when they finally spoke, they said what they had always said: "Please don't make us furious." One elder species, a being of crystalline structure that had existed for over 20,000 years, tilted its massive frame and whispered to its neighbor, Why do they keep saying that? They are so small, so fragile. A neighbor, a floating entity of light, laughed softly. It is cute, really. They think words can stop war. But even among the elders, there were whispers of doubt. A few had studied humanity from afar, quietly observing their history, their resilience, and their adaptability. They had noticed patterns that others ignored, the way humans could endure hardship without breaking, how they could cooperate under pressure, and how they could survive even in the most dangerous environments. Some of these older species knew that humans were underestimated at their own peril, yet they remained silent, afraid to share what they had learned. Humans continued to watch and listen. They did not show fear, but they were aware of the laughter, the underestimation, the dismissive gestures of the council. They had learned to accept it. Humans had learned that being underestimated was one of the greatest advantages a species could have. It allowed them to observe, plan, and prepare without interference. And most importantly, it allowed them to protect themselves and the galaxy from the consequences of a power they had long kept in check. In their private chambers, human leaders often discussed the phrase that had become their mantra: "Please don't make us furious." It was a reminder of both restraint and potential. It was a way of saying, we are willing to coexist peacefully, but there is a limit to our patience. Do not cross it. They knew that the galaxy did not understand them, but they also knew that patience had saved them countless times. It had kept them alive when others had failed. And one day, it would make the difference between survival and annihilation, not just for humans, but for the entire galaxy. For now, they waited. They smiled politely, bowed when appropriate, and repeated the phrase with the calmest tone possible. It was a phrase that could have sounded almost timid, but behind it was centuries of experience, of hardship, and of survival instinct. They were not powerless. They were hiding power so carefully that even the most advanced species had no idea what humanity was truly capable of. And so the humans remained at the council, listening, watching, and preparing. Their calmness was unsettling to some, boring to others, and confusing to most. They did not speak more than necessary, but every word, every gesture, every phrase had meaning. The galaxy, for all its complexity and experience, did not know what it had just begun to underestimate. In the next moments, months, and years, the galaxy would begin to understand why humanity kept saying the words they did. They would begin to see that it was not weakness, not fear, not melodrama. It was a warning born from understanding, from the long history of their species, from a recognition of their own power, and from a hope that no one would ever force them to unleash it. And as the council continued their endless debates, humans simply waited. They waited for the moment when patience would meet necessity, when restraint would meet reckoning, and when the galaxy would finally learn the true meaning behind their words. Please don't make us furious. Those who truly observed them, quietly and carefully, noticed something almost imperceptible in human eyes. A spark, calm yet intense, like a storm held in suspension. It was not anger, at least not yet, but it was a warning. And the universe, in its arrogance, did not yet understand that warnings were not suggestions. They were promises. For humans, patience was strength, politeness was power, and restraint was survival. They had spent centuries learning it, and the universe would soon discover just how serious they had been. Even now, they continued to watch, to speak softly, and to say what had become their constant refrain: "Please don't make us furious." The words echoed in the vast chambers of the council, unnoticed by many, misunderstood by most, but carrying within them the weight of an entire species' history. And for the first time, the galaxy should have paused, listened, and understood. But it did not. It was the first step in a chain of events that would soon show the universe the truth about humanity, not the fragile, polite species it assumed them to be, but a force of restraint, endurance, and unimaginable potential, quietly, preparing for the moment when words would no longer be enough. Humans had always been careful. They understood that the galaxy was vast, filled with beings who did not think as they did, who did not value patience or diplomacy. They knew that in most parts of the universe, strength and aggression determined respect. But humans had learned something different on their home planet, that patience, planning, and restraint could be just as powerful, if not more so, than brute force. For centuries, humans had sent envoys to distant systems, quietly observing, quietly learning. They had studied the behaviors of other species, the patterns of aggression, and the way civilizations responded to threats. They had learned that appearances could be deceiving. A polite, calm demeanor often hid great power. A small, careful species could survive against odds that would destroy others. So when the border skirmish began, the humans were not unprepared. The Dravic Dominion, a warlike species known for their aggression and pride, had seized one of the human colonies on the edge of their territory. It was a minor world, not strategic in terms of resources or military power, but its capture was meant as a show of strength. The Dravic believed humanity would panic, beg for mercy, and perhaps even surrender more worlds just to avoid conflict. The humans did not panic. They did not scream or retaliate. Instead, they sent a calm message to the council. Please, don't make us furious. The words were simple, the tone polite. But behind those words was the weight of centuries of survival, of restraint learned from history, of understanding the consequences of every action. The council, as usual, dismissed it. They laughed quietly in the chambers, whispering to one another that the humans were overreacting, that they had no real power to act. They did not realize that humanity had already begun to move, not openly, but quietly, strategically. Ships were repositioned, evacuation protocols were activated, and civilians were guided to safe zones. All this happened without fanfare, without warning, without anyone outside the humans' own ranks noticing. Even the Dravic, arrogant and proud, did not expect resistance. They believed they had nothing to fear from a species that always bowed politely, that always spoke in calm tones, that always repeated the same warning as if it were a joke. They did not see the small movements, the careful preparations, the precise coordination happening in the shadows. Inside the human command centers, leaders worked with calm efficiency. They spoke quietly, issuing orders that were clear and deliberate. Every action was calculated to protect life, to avoid unnecessary destruction, but also to prepare for the worst. They had trained for moments like this for generations, learning from mistakes that their species had made in the past, learning how to respond to threats without losing control. And while the humans worked quietly, the galaxy continued to misinterpret them. Some species mocked the humans for being timid. Others doubted their ability to act decisively. Even some of the humans themselves felt the tension, wondering if their restraint would be seen as weakness. But every human in the command centers knew the truth. Restraint was not weakness, it was strategy. It was the difference between survival and disaster that the Dravic sent messages to the council boasting about their conquest. They posted images of the captured world, showing their ships hovering over human cities, claiming that humanity was now at their mercy. They assumed the humans would either submit or retaliate in a panic. Neither happened. The humans responded in a way that would confuse and unsettle anyone who did not understand their history. They sent a single, calm message back, repeating their mantra. Please, don't make us furious. There was no anger in their voice, no threats, no drama. Just calm, quiet words that carried centuries of restraint and understanding. Even in that moment, the humans did not forget their purpose. They were not trying to intimidate the galaxy, nor were they seeking revenge. They were simply protecting their people, preserving life, and preparing for any eventuality. Every decision they made was measured, every action deliberate. They had learned that when faced with aggression, the calmest response could be the most powerful. Yet the Council and the Dravik both misread the situation completely. They saw politeness as weakness, restraint as hesitation, and patience as a lack of power. They did not understand that the human's calmness was a warning, not a plea. They did not understand that the human's restraint was a shield, a protective barrier that kept the galaxy safe from the force humanity could unleash if pushed too far. And so, while the Dravik celebrated their perceived victory, the humans continued to prepare. Their evacuation plans moved smoothly. Civilians were relocated, and key assets were hidden or reinforced. Every move was silent, invisible to the galaxy, yet perfectly coordinated. Humans had become masters of subtlety, turning every action into a step toward security without revealing their true strength. Inside the Dravik command ships, frustration began to grow. Their messages went unanswered, their taunts ignored. The humans did not beg, did not threaten, did not react as expected. They simply carried on with their calm efficiency, repeating the same words that had already become infamous. Please, don't make us furious. Some among the Dravik began to worry. They had never seen a species react this way to aggression. They could not understand the calm, and it unsettled them. But arrogance still dominated their decisions. They assumed the human's restraint was temporary, that sooner or later, fear or desperation would force them to act foolishly. They were wrong. Humans had never been foolish. Every decision, every word, every movement was based on knowledge, experience, and understanding of consequences. They had survived plagues, wars, and natural disasters on their home planet because they had learned to control impulses, to think ahead, and to act with purpose. That same approach now guided them in the wider galaxy. As the hours turned into days, the Dravik assumed victory was complete. Their occupation of the colony world seemed absolute, their propaganda unchallenged. The Council continued to dismiss the situation, believing that the humans would eventually submit or beg for help. They did not realize that the humans' calm words were not requests but warnings. They did not see that behind the polite tones, humanity was quietly preparing a response that would change the perception of their species forever. Meanwhile, the humans worked tirelessly. Scientists, engineers, and strategists coordinated every action. Civilian ships were moved under the cover of darkness. Defense systems were reinforced without alerting the Dravik. Communications were monitored, weaknesses identified, and contingencies prepared. Every human involved knew the stakes. Failure was not an option. Survival required not only courage, but calm, focus, and patience. In the council chambers, whispers began to spread. A few observers who had studied humanity carefully noticed something strange. The humans' calmness was unnerving, almost unnatural. They did not panic, they did not plead, and they did not act rashly. They simply waited, carried out their plans silently, and repeated the same phrase over and over. Please, don't make us furious. Those who understood even a little began to worry. Humanity's patience, long praised as a virtue, might conceal something dangerous. But most dismissed the concern. It was easier to mock what you did not understand than to admit that a seemingly weak species might actually be dangerous. And so, the situation continued. The Dravik believed they had won. The Council believed the humans were harmless. And the humans continued their quiet preparations. Their calmness was both a shield and a warning, a signal that the galaxy had largely ignored. They had moved beyond fear, beyond anger, and into a state of focused readiness. They were ready for what might come next, even if no one else realized it yet. The humans understood the delicate balance. They knew that overt retaliation would draw attention and perhaps escalate the conflict unnecessarily. They also knew that patience allowed them to observe, analyze, and act at the most effective moment. In the end, their restraint was not submission. It was control. It was power tempered with wisdom, a lesson the galaxy had yet to learn. As the days passed, the humans continued to send the same calm message. Please, don't make us furious. It was not a cry for mercy. It was a declaration of readiness, a quiet but firm reminder that their patience had limits. The Dravik, confident in their perceived victory, did not understand it. The Council, preoccupied with their own politics, did not grasp it. But the humans did, and in that calm, quiet preparation, humanity showed the galaxy something it had never seen before. That power was not always loud. That strength could be patient, and that a species underestimated at its own risk could survive anything. They had survived before. They would survive again. And the universe would soon learn why humans always said the words they did, why they asked not to be provoked, and why those who ignored their warning would come to regret it. The humans waited, calm and composed, knowing that the next step was coming. They did not rush. They did not panic. They did not falter. Their patience was their weapon, their restraint their armor, and their understanding of themselves and their history their greatest advantage. And the Dravik, in their arrogance, had no idea what they were about to face. For humans, this was not just about survival. It was about proving silently and surely that the polite warnings had meaning. That please, don't make us furious, was not a joke, not an expression of we. The humans had waited, watched, and prepared quietly, but patience had its limits. The Dravik Dominion, drunk on their perceived victory, had gone too far. They had captured the colony, humiliated its people, and sent propaganda messages across the galaxy, boasting of their triumph. But the breaking point came when they executed a small group of human diplomats on a live broadcast. These diplomats had gone unarmed, with no weapons, and had been nothing but messengers, hoping to maintain communication and peace. The council chambers erupted in shock and disbelief. Many species whispered in horror. The Dravik thought they had demonstrated power, but they did not realize that what they had done would awaken something no one in the galaxy had ever seen. Humans received the news quietly. There were no shouts, no frantic calls, no immediate retaliation. They listened to the reports, watched the recordings, and studied the messages sent by the Dravik. For a moment, the room was silent, almost too quiet. Then a single, steady voice repeated the phrase that had defined humanity for centuries. Please, don't make us furious. It was calm, measured, almost serene, but it carried a weight that no one outside humanity could fully comprehend. This was not a plea. It was a warning. It was the result of years of preparation, centuries of history, and generations of survival instincts channeled into patience. Every human in the command centers understood the significance of that moment, while the council debated what action to take or whether to intervene at all. The humans moved. Their fleets, long positioned strategically, shifted without fanfare. Communications were carefully monitored, weaknesses in the Dravik defense identified, and every civilian already in secure locations. No human moved recklessly. Every action was precise, coordinated, and deliberate. The Dravik, confident in their power, assumed that the human silence and calm were signs of submission. They had misread humanity before, and now they repeated the same mistake. They did not realize that the humans were preparing a response that would leave the galaxy stunned. Humanity had always known how to survive, how to endure, and how to act when the moment demanded it. They had survived plagues, wars, famines, and natural disasters on their home planet. They had survived the arrogance of more powerful civilizations, both on Earth and beyond. And now, they were preparing to survive the consequences of this direct provocation. Inside the human command centers, leaders worked with quiet efficiency. Scientists, strategists, engineers, and military officers coordinated every detail. Ships were positioned to defend key systems. while others were ready to disable Dravic vessels without unnecessary destruction. Human diplomats sent messages to neutral systems, ensuring that no one else would be dragged into the conflict unnecessarily. Civilians were safe, supplies were secured, and contingency plans accounted for every possible scenario. The calmness of the humans unnerved the Council and the Dravic alike. No one could understand why a species that had suffered such a blatant attack remained so composed. Observers whispered to one another, trying to rationalize the humans' behavior. Some thought they were foolish, some thought they were afraid, and a few, older species who had studied humanity quietly, realized the terrifying truth. Humans were restrained for a reason. Their calm was not weakness. Their patience was not inaction. It was a controlled power, a force that could not be measured by the usual means of military strength or technology. The Dravic, in their arrogance, continued their propaganda. They broadcasted images of captured human ships and messages of conquest, mocking humanity for being timid and submissive. But humanity did not respond with anger or threats. They continued to prepare, positioning their forces, reinforcing defenses, and quietly gathering intelligence. Every move was deliberate, every action designed to maximize effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary chaos. And then came the moment that changed. ElevenLabs, Dravic commander, believing that the humans would finally act out of desperation, attacked a lightly defended human station, killing hundreds of unarmed civilians in the process. The act was brutal, intentional, and designed to provoke fear and chaos. The Council watched with horror, expecting humanity to react with panic or surrender. But humanity did not panic. They did not shout. They did not retaliate recklessly. Instead, the command center went silent for a few moments. Then a single voice, calm and unwavering, repeated the phrase one final time. "Please, don't make us furious." It was a signal. Every human in command centers across multiple systems understood it immediately. This was no longer a warning. It was the moment of controlled reckoning. Humans had prepared for this eventuality for centuries. Every skill, every strategy, every lesson learned from their long history was now being applied in real time. Fleets moved with precision, disabling Dravic systems with minimal casualties to civilians. Their attacks were not driven by anger, but by strategy, intelligence, and discipline. Ships struck with surgical accuracy, disabling weapons, communications, and propulsion systems without unnecessary destruction. Humans had mastered the art of controlled force. They did not waste energy. They did not indulge in revenge. Every move was calculated to ensure victory while maintaining their ethical principles. The Dravic, taken completely by surprise, scrambled to respond. Their arrogance had convinced them that humans would panic or beg for mercy. They did not realize that humans could endure loss, suppress anger, and act with the precision of a species that understood the value of patience. Their attacks were ineffective, their communications intercepted, and their strategies anticipated. Every move they made was countered not with brute force, but with intelligence and calm determination. For the Council, the sight was shocking. They had underestimated humans for centuries, dismissing their warnings as politeness or weakness. And now, they watched as humans demonstrated a level of strategic mastery and controlled power that no one had anticipated. The calm words, the repeated mantra of "please, don't make us furious," had concealed a force that was precise, disciplined, and terrifying in its efficiency. Humans, meanwhile, did not celebrate. There was no gloating, no joy in the destruction of the Dravic's offensive capabilities. Their focus remained on protection, on survival, and on restoring balance. They understood the gravity of the situation. Their anger, though controlled, had been provoked. They had the power to destroy, but they also had the wisdom to restrain. Their actions were guided not by hatred, but by necessity, by the need to protect life and prevent further aggression. In the Dravik fleets, panic began to spread. Their commanders shouted orders that were no longer effective. Their ships were disabled before they could respond, and communication breakdowns left them isolated. They realized too late that they had underestimated a species that had mastered patience, discipline, and strategic control. Humans had waited for the perfect moment, and now that moment had arrived. Even the Council, watching in awe, could not fully grasp the scale of humanity's restraint and power. The humans had acted decisively, ending the immediate threat without causing unnecessary chaos. They had demonstrated that patience was not weakness, that politeness was not submission, and that restraint could be more powerful than aggression. And yet, humanity did not stop there. They ensured that civilians were safe, that surviving Dravik forces were given opportunities to surrender, and that neutral systems were not drawn into conflict. Their actions were precise, ethical, and controlled. They were showing the galaxy that their calm words were not empty. They carried meaning, history, and experience. For the first time, some species began to understand what humans had been warning all along. The repeated mantra, "Please, don't make us furious," was not a plea. It was a warning of restraint, patience, and potential. It was a signal that humans had power beyond what could be measured in fleets or weapons. It was a reflection of a species that had survived for centuries, not because of fear, but because of control, intelligence, and understanding. The humans themselves did not dwell on their victory. Their focus remained on protecting life, maintaining order, and preparing for whatever might come next. They had demonstrated their capabilities, yes, but their ultimate goal was stability, not dominance. They understood that anger, even when justified, was dangerous if left uncontrolled. They had seen the consequences of uncontrolled anger in their own history, and had worked for centuries to master it. And so, the galaxy began to learn a difficult lesson. Humans were not weak, polite, or submissive. They were disciplined, patient, and strategic. They had the power to respond decisively, but they chose restraint until provoked beyond reason. Their calm words, repeated endlessly across generations, had always carried meaning. "Please, don't make us furious." It was a lesson that Dravik would never forget. It was a lesson the Council would remember too, though perhaps with regret. And for humanity, it was a confirmation of everything they had learned about themselves. That patience, discipline, and understanding were not just virtues, they were survival, power, and wisdom. For now, the humans returned to quiet observation. They had acted when necessary, protected their people, and demonstrated their capabilities without letting anger consume them. But the galaxy had been warned. The calm, steady words that had once seemed harmless now carried the weight of experience and power. The moment had come. Humanity had waited patiently, restrained their anger, and prepared carefully. And now the time for controlled action had arrived. The Dravik Dominion, arrogant and overconfident, had pushed the humans too far. They had attacked unarmed diplomats, occupied colonies, and broadcast their violence to the galaxy. They thought humanity would panic, beg, or retaliate recklessly. They were about to learn how wrong they were. But even as humans began to respond, there was no shouting, no chaos, no frantic commands. Every move was deliberate, precise, and coordinated. In command centers across multiple systems, humans worked silently but efficiently. Analysts monitored enemy movements. Engineers calculated optimal defensive and offensive strategies. And strategists ensured every action would protect civilians first. Every human involved understood the mission: neutralize the threat, minimize unnecessary destruction, and demonstrate power with precision. The first ships moved quietly through space, almost invisible against the darkness. They were smaller than the massive Dravik warships, and yet their speed and maneuverability gave them a tactical advantage. Every human pilot had been trained to anticipate enemy movements, to strike weak points, and to retreat before being noticed if necessary. It was not brute force, but intelligence that gave humanity an edge. When the first Dravik vessels detected the humans' movements, it was already too late. Systems designed for rapid attacks and overwhelming power found themselves disabled before they could act. Weapons shut down, communications jammed, and propulsion systems disrupted all, without a single human casualty in those initial strikes. It was surgical, controlled, and devastating in its precision. The Dravik commanders screamed orders that were ignored by their failing systems. Their arrogance had convinced them that humans would strike in anger, recklessly, without planning. But humans had never struck recklessly. They acted with focus, discipline, and patience honed over centuries of survival. Every action was calculated to maximize effectiveness and minimize unnecessary harm. In the council chambers, watchers could not believe what they were seeing. Humans, the species they had underestimated for centuries, had revealed a power they could not measure in numbers or technology alone. Their calm demeanor, repeated mantra, and apparent patience had hidden a force that was precise, intelligent, and unstoppable when applied. The repeated words, "Please, don't make us furious," now made sense. They were not mere warnings, they were a reflection of restraint backed by immense capability. Back in the human command centers, leaders moved with quiet urgency. They communicated through secure channels, issuing instructions with clarity and calm. Every civilian was accounted for, every key system reinforced, and every enemy movement tracked. The humans did not rush. They did not panic. They acted as a single organism, each part working in perfect synchronization with the others. The Dravik forces, meanwhile, were thrown into chaos. Ships designed for intimidation and raw aggression could not withstand the humans' controlled strikes. One by one, weapons were disabled, engines shut down, and command networks disrupted. The Dravik had never encountered an enemy that could act so efficiently, without anger, without emotion, without fear. The humans' calm had become a weapon more powerful than any laser, missile, or fleet, and still, humans did not celebrate. There was no gloating, no excessive damage, no targeting of civilians. Every action had a purpose: end the immediate threat, protect life, and demonstrate that humanity's power was precise, ethical, and controlled. They had no desire for unnecessary destruction. They did not seek revenge. They sought only balance, justice, and survival. Some of the Dravik began to realize their mistake too late. They had assumed humanity was weak, timid, and easily intimidated. They had assumed that repeated warnings of, "Please, don't make us furious," were a sign of fear, not a reflection of centuries of restraint and strategy. Now, as their fleets faltered under the humans' controlled strikes, they understood that they had underestimated a species that had survived countless threats, adapted to unimaginable challenges, and mastered patience as a weapon. The humans moved with astonishing efficiency. Entire fleets of Dravik warships were neutralized without the need for full-scale destruction. Communications were intercepted, allowing humans to anticipate attacks before they happened. Defense systems were reinforced in real time, creating barriers that the Dravik could not breach. Even the smallest human vessels played critical roles, exploiting weaknesses in the enemy's formation with pinpoint accuracy. And yet, despite their success, humans maintained restraint. No one was punished unnecessarily, no ship destroyed without purpose, and no life lost beyond the unavoidable consequences of the conflict. It was a demonstration not of cruelty, but of mastery, control of technology, strategy, an emotion to achieve maximum impact with minimal cost. The Council, who had once laughed at humanity's warnings, now watched in awe. They could not deny what they were seeing. Humans were not weak, timid, or submissive. They were disciplined, intelligent, and terrifying in their efficiency. The calm phrase that had seemed so polite, so simple, now resonated with meaning. Please don't make us furious. It was a reflection of restraint, patience, and potential that no other species had ever demonstrated so clearly. Even as the Dravik fleets faltered, humans continued their coordinated operations. Engineers on board human ships worked tirelessly to reinforce damaged systems and anticipate counterattacks. Strategists analyzed enemy formations in real time, issuing commands that neutralized threats before they could fully form. Civilians were safe, as evacuation protocols had already ensured their protection. And all the while, humans maintained their calm, steady focus, showing the galaxy that their patience was not weakness, but power. The Dravik attempted to regroup, but their arrogance had blinded them to the humans' capabilities. Their attacks became desperate, disorganized, and predictable. Every move they made was countered with precision, every weakness exploited without excess. Humans had turned their restraint into a weapon, their patience into a shield, and their intelligence into an unstoppable force. And still, humans did not rejoice in destruction. They did not celebrate victory with fanfare or gloating messages. Their goal had always been protection, survival, and restoration of balance. Every action was deliberate, every decision calculated, and every strike purposeful. They had proven their point without giving in to the destructive impulses that often followed conflict. As the Dravik fleets began to surrender or retreat, the humans issued clear instructions for the safe release of prisoners and the protection of neutral systems. They ensured that even the defeated enemy would survive if they cooperated. This was a species that understood that true power was not measured by how much destruction one could cause, but by how much could be prevented while still achieving objectives. Across the galaxy, observers began to understand. Humanity's calm warnings were not empty words. They were reflections of a species that had mastered itself, that had survived countless challenges, and that had learned to wield patience as a weapon. The repeated phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," had always carried meaning. It had been a warning of restraint, a sign of potential, and a demonstration of control that the galaxy had failed to recognize. Until now, the humans themselves returned to their work quietly. Fleets were reorganized, damaged systems repaired, and civilians assisted. There was no triumphalism, no arrogance, only a quiet satisfaction in having done what was necessary, and nothing more. They had shown the universe what it meant to underestimate humanity, and they had done so with discipline, precision, and control. Even as the Dravik retreated, their arrogance shattered. Humans did not pursue unnecessary revenge. They had proven their strength, ensured the safety of their people, and protected neutral systems. Their actions demonstrated a principle that had guided their species for generations. Patience, control, and intelligence were more powerful than chaos, aggression, and fear. The Council, watching all of this unfold, finally began to understand. Humans were not fragile, timid, or weak. They were disciplined, patient, and terrifyingly capable when provoked beyond reason. The calm words that had once seemed polite were now recognized for what they truly were, a reflection of centuries of restraint, intelligence, and survival instinct. The Dravik would never forget what had happened. The galaxy would never forget it either. And for humanity, the lesson was clear. Their patience had been tested. Their restraint had been honored, and their power had been revealed, not through chaos or destruction, but through calm, precise action guided by intelligence, ethics, and focus. From that moment on, the universe would never underestimate humans again. The repeated phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," had finally been understood, not as a plea, not as a warning to be ignored, but as a reflection of a species that had survived everything by mastering patience. control, and the art of strategic power, humans returned to observation, quiet, calm, and watchful. Their actions had been decisive, but their intent remained clear: protect life, maintain balance, and ensure that the galaxy understood the true meaning of their patience. They had demonstrated that restraint could be a weapon more powerful than any fleet, more devastating than any war machine. And the galaxy had seen humans act with precision and restraint, but even after their decisive response, much of the universe still did not understand their true motives. To many species, humans were simply strong because they had been forced to defend themselves. They had been underestimated, provoked, and pushed into action. That was true, but humans had acted with far more purpose than anyone realized. Their calmness, their precision, and their patience were not just tools of survival. They were a reflection of how deeply humans valued life and understanding in the days following the conflict. Human fleets maintained positions near key systems, not to assert dominance, but to ensure safety and order. Every action was deliberate, every deployment measured. Humans had no desire for conquest, no wish to claim territory beyond what was necessary to protect themselves. Yet the power they displayed was undeniable. Every observer could see that humanity, if pushed further, could become a force unmatched in the galaxy. The Council, who had long dismissed humans as polite but insignificant, began to reassess. They held emergency meetings to discuss the implications of what had happened. Whispers filled the chamber species, debating whether humanity should be feared, respected, or controlled. The problem was, humanity did not seek control, dominance, or recognition. They only sought balance and protection. That distinction, many in the galaxy struggled to grasp. Humans, meanwhile, did not use this attention to assert authority. They continued their calm observation, quietly rebuilding damaged systems, helping surviving colonies, and ensuring that no further harm came to civilians. Their actions were deliberate, ethical, and transparent. Every human involved understood one simple principle: power without control could be dangerous. But restraint with knowledge and planning was both a shield and a tool for peace. Across the galaxy, species began to notice patterns they had previously ignored. Humans acted collectively, not out of panic, but with shared understanding and purpose. Decisions were not made on emotion alone. They were calculated, discussed, and executed with precision. Even in moments of crisis, humans prioritized life and order over revenge or dominance. This realization caused a mixture of awe, fear, and respect among the observers. In some regions, species who had once ridiculed humans began to approach them cautiously, seeking dialogue. They wanted to understand the species that could act decisively yet ethically, that could strike with power, but without unnecessary destruction. But humans did not boast or demand recognition. They listened, they observed, and they responded only when necessary. Even in communication, their words were deliberate, thoughtful, and measured. Meanwhile, the Dravik, now recovering from the shock of humanity's response, tried to regroup. Their arrogance had been shattered. They had assumed humans would panic, would beg for mercy, or would act recklessly. Instead, humans had acted with such precision and restraint that the Dravik were left scrambling to understand how they had been so easily neutralized. The lesson was painful. Humans were not a species to underestimate, and every provocation could lead to consequences far beyond what the galaxy had ever imagined. In human command centers, leaders and strategists reflected on the actions they had taken. They had achieved their objectives without unnecessary loss of life or escalation. They had protected civilians, neutralized threats, and demonstrated the capabilities of their species. And yet, they were not satisfied with simply winning a conflict. They understood that the true challenge lay in maintaining the balance they had restored. Humans reached out to other species affected by the conflict, offering aid and support. Supplies were sent to neutral systems, medical teams assisted civilians, and infrastructure damaged in the conflict was repaired. This was not an act of dominance or superiority. It was a reflection of humanity's core values: survival, empathy, and cooperation. They had the power to destroy, but they chose instead to protect and restore. The Council, watching these actions unfold, began to understand something fundamental. Humanity's repeated phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," was more than a warning. It was a reflection of restraint and ethical discipline. Humans had the ability to act with devastating effect, but they also had the ability to choose not to. That choice, made consistently and intentionally, was what set them apart from every other species the Council had encountered, even in systems far removed from the conflict. Observers began to share stories of humanity's actions. They spoke of precision, patience, and ethical control. They spoke of a species that had survived countless challenges, learned from history, and applied their knowledge to protect both themselves and others. The repeated phrase became a symbol, not of fear, but of restraint and potential. Humans had taught the galaxy a lesson without issuing threats, without displaying aggression, and without arrogance. Back on human worlds, civilians returned to their lives cautiously, but with trust in the systems designed to protect them. There was a sense of quiet pride, not in victory, but in the survival and integrity of their species. Humans had faced aggression, responded decisively, and yet maintained their principles. They had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that their patience was not weakness and their calm was not submission. Some members of the Council, humbled by the demonstration, began advocating for a new approach to diplomacy with humanity. They suggested that other species treat humans with respect, not because of fear, but because humans had shown that their decisions were guided by principle, discipline, and foresight. Humans were a species that thought ahead, considered consequences, and acted ethically, even under extreme pressure. This understanding began to shift perceptions, slowly but steadily, across the galaxy. For humanity, this recognition was secondary. Their focus remained on observation, protection, and preparation. They had shown their power when necessary, but they also understood that restraint was a continuous effort. The galaxy could see their strength, but humans had to continue demonstrating that patience, control, and intelligence were as important as capability. Even as alliances shifted and other species reconsidered their approach, humans remained vigilant. Their fleets were repositioned strategically, their colonies reinforced, and their communication networks maintained for efficiency and security. They did not seek confrontation, but they were prepared for it if provoked again. They had learned that the universe was unpredictable, and that patience, planning, and restraint were the keys to long-term survival. In discussions with other civilizations, humans emphasized cooperation and understanding. They offered guidance on resolving conflicts without escalation, sharing knowledge about strategies that prioritized life and safety. Their calm demeanor and ethical approach impressed many, but also caused fear in those who had relied on aggression as a measure of power. Humanity's approach was a reminder that true strength was not always loud or destructive. As the months passed, humans continued to rebuild and stabilize affected areas. They ensured that trade, travel, and communication could resume safely. Even the Dravik, humbled and cautious, had to acknowledge humanity's approach. They had faced a species that could act decisively, yet ethically, and they had survived only because humans had chosen restraint. The lesson was clear. Provoking humanity carried risks far beyond immediate consequences, and the galaxy had no guarantee of what restraint might look like if tested again. Humans also focused on education and preparation for future generations. They shared the lessons learned, not only about strategy and survival, but also about ethics, patience, and decision-making under pressure. Every human, from leader to civilian, understood the balance between power and restraint. They knew that the calm words, "Please, don't make us furious," were not just warnings, but guiding principles for how their species would navigate the universe. The galaxy began to understand that humans were unique. They were not conquerors, nor were they reckless defenders. They were disciplined, patient, and ethical. They could respond with devastating effect when provoked. But their true strength lay in restraint, in calculation, and in the consistent application of principles that valued life and understanding over aggression. For the Council, the realization came slowly but surely. Humans were not to be feared because of power alone. They were to be respected for their patience, their discipline, and their ethical control. The repeated phrase, once mocked or ignored, became a reminder to all species. There was a limit to patience, and crossing it could awaken a force beyond comprehension. Humans continued their quiet work, rebuilding, observing, and preparing. They did not seek accolades or recognition. They had acted decisively when necessary, and the galaxy had witnessed the results. Yet their focus remained steady: protect life, maintain balance, and continue to demonstrate that strength is most powerful when paired with restraint and ethical control. And so, the galaxy began to shift. Species that had once ignored or mocked humans now approached with caution and respect. Alliances were reconsidered, strategies revised, and perceptions of humanity transformed. The lesson was clear. Humans were not merely polite or timid. They were disciplined, strategic, and capable of incredible restraint and power. Their calm warnings had meaning, and the universe had learned it the hard way. Even as the humans returned to their routines, the EC. The Council had been humbled, the Dravik shaken, and the galaxy forever changed. For centuries, humans had been underestimated, dismissed as polite but harmless, too small and too restrained to matter on the galactic stage. But the last series of events proved otherwise. Humanity had acted with precision, with intelligence, and above all, with ethical restraint. Their repeated words, "Please, don't make us furious," were no longer warnings. They were lessons the universe could not ignore. The Council convened an emergency session to review the events. Species from across the galaxy gathered, some cautiously, others still skeptical, but all aware that they had witnessed something unprecedented. Hushed conversations filled the chambers as delegates attempted to process what had happened. Many could not believe that a species that had seemed so restrained, so polite, could wield such power with clarity and control. For the humans, the Council's deliberations mattered little. They had acted to protect their people, ensure stability, and demonstrate restraint in the face of provocation. Their focus was not on recognition or accolades, but on ensuring that the galaxy understood the consequences of underestimating them. They did not boast. They did not issue threats. They simply maintained their calm, knowing that their actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Meanwhile, the Dravik dominions struggled to recover. Their arrogance had been shattered, their strategies dismantled, and their fleet neutralized. They had underestimated humans repeatedly, failing to understand that patience, discipline, and intelligence could be more powerful than brute force. Now, their species faced a difficult choice: surrender fully, attempt diplomacy, or risk another confrontation they were unlikely to survive. The humans offered terms not as a form of dominance, but as a reflection of their principles. Prisoners were released, colonies returned, and communication channels opened to ensure cooperation and understanding. The Dravik, humbled and cautious, had no choice but to accept. Every action taken by humans reinforced a single lesson. They could strike decisively, but they valued life, ethics, and stability over revenge or aggression. Across the galaxy, species began to reassess humanity. Those who had mocked or ignored the humans now approached with caution and respect. Observers recorded the precision, intelligence, and restraint demonstrated in every decision. Humans had not merely defended themselves, they had reshaped the perception of power and ethics in interstellar relations. Their calm words had always carried weight, but the universe was only now beginning to understand why. Human leaders continued to operate with quiet efficiency. Fleets were repositioned, colonies reinforced, and key systems maintained for security. The focus was always on protection and balance. No species had reason to fear humans unnecessarily, but all had reason to respect them. Humanity's ethical control, strategic precision, and disciplined patience had set a new standard for survival and interaction across the stars. The Council, reflecting on its misjudgment, issued statements acknowledging humanity's actions and principles. They admitted that humans had been underestimated and that their restraint was a deliberate and powerful form of control. The phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," was recognized not as politeness, but as a reflection of centuries of wisdom, discipline, and strategic foresight. In the systems affected by the conflict, humans assisted in rebuilding and stabilizing societies. Infrastructure was restored, trade routes reopened, and civilians aided. Every action taken reinforced the core principle that guided humanity. Power used without control was dangerous, but power tempered with patience and ethical decision-making was transformative. The galaxy could see that humans could act decisively when required, but they would never act recklessly or without cause. The Dravic Dominion, now subdued and careful, observed humanity in a new light. They had once assumed that the humans' warnings were signs of fear or weakness. Now, they understood that every calm word and patient decision reflected immense capability and thoughtful planning. To provoke humans again would be a grave error, one that the Dravic were unlikely to survive. Even species that had not been directly affected by the conflict began to study humans more closely. Diplomatic missions were planned and new treaties proposed, not out of fear alone, but out of respect for the careful, controlled, and ethical power humans had demonstrated. The galaxy realized that the humans' patience was a reflection of strength, not submission. Their calm was not timidity, it was power restrained by wisdom. Inside human command centers, leaders prepared for the long-term implications. They understood that their actions had set a precedent, and that the galaxy would never again underestimate their species. Plans were made to maintain security, promote cooperation, and continue observing potential threats. Every decision was deliberate, reflecting a balance between readiness and ethical restraint. Humans also worked to educate other species about their principles. They shared strategies for avoiding unnecessary conflict, protecting civilians, and maintaining stability. Their approach was not coercive, nor was it driven by a desire to dominate. It was an extension of their core values: patience, discipline, and ethical action guided by intelligence and foresight. As the galaxy slowly absorbed the implications, humans returned to quiet vigilance. Fleets were maintained, but the focus remained on observation and protection rather than conquest. Colonies thrived under careful management, and diplomatic channels with other species expanded. Humanity's reputation as disciplined, ethical, and strategically intelligent grew steadily, reaching species that had once dismissed them as insignificant. The Council, humbled by their earlier misjudgment, began to revise policies and protocols regarding humans. Treaties and agreements were reconsidered, with an understanding that humanity's power, while rarely displayed aggressively, carried significant consequences if provoked. The repeated phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," was no longer dismissed. It was understood as a principle of restraint, a reflection of discipline, and a reminder of the ethical power that guided every human action. In time, the galaxy came to recognize humans as a species unlike any other. They were not conquerors, nor were they driven by reckless aggression. They were disciplined, ethical, and patient. They acted decisively when necessary, but always with thought, foresight, and control. Their calm words had been a warning for centuries, and now the universe understood why those words mattered. Even the Dravik, once aggressive and arrogant, learned a hard lesson in humility. They realized that humanity's power was not measured solely by technology or fleet size, but by patience, discipline, and the consistent application of ethical principles. Every action humans had taken reflected centuries of careful planning and a deep understanding of the consequences of anger, power, and conflict. Humans themselves continued their quiet work, rebuilding, observing, and preparing for the future. They had demonstrated their capabilities, protected their people, and ensured stability. But their focus remained steady: safeguard life, maintain balance, and act ethically in every situation. The universe had witnessed their power, but humans continued to prove that restraint was as important as strength. And the Council, having learned its lesson, would never underestimate humanity again. The repeated phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," had finally been understood across the galaxy. It was no longer a polite request, no longer a warning to be ignored. It was a reflection of discipline, ethical control, and strategic foresight, a principle that defined humanity and ensured that the galaxy would think carefully before provoking them in the future. In the end, humans returned to their routines with quiet confidence. They had acted decisively, ethically, and effectively. They had protected life, maintained order, and demonstrated that power, when guided by restraint, could achieve far more than aggression alone. The universe had learned a lesson that would echo across generations. Humanity's patience was not weakness, their calm was not submission, and their repeated warning carried a weight no one could ignore. From that moment on, the galaxy approached humanity with respect, caution, and curiosity. Species that once mocked or underestimated them now studied their strategies, observed their actions, and learned from their restraint. Humanity had not conquered through fear or aggression, but through disciplined, ethical, and controlled demonstration of power. The phrase, "Please, don't make us furious," would live on as a reminder to the galaxy of the species that had mastered the art of patience, control, and power. And so, humanity remained vigilant, patient, and ethical. They had survived provocation, demonstrated their strength, and earned the galaxy's respect without compromising their principles. The lesson was clear: underestimate humans at your peril, for their calm is not weakness, and their patience carries consequences far beyond comprehension. The universe had finally learned the full meaning of humanity's words, and it would never forget them.